Chapter 14. A Destructive Force. As head of my very own cooperative, I got to know firsthand what a destructive force, one capable of crushing any material state of well-being, impatience towards each other, and the breakdown of mutual understanding can be. Later I learned that this is the very reason behind the failure of many collectives, and it can all start over a trifle. Indeed, that is how it happened with my first cooperative. Not only was it torn apart itself, but several families were destroyed in the process. Even today, I still don't know how to counteract this force which erupts spontaneously and is not subject to common sense. It all began when I decided to procure for our firm a country house with its own estate. I entrusted the details to our acting inventory and supply manager, Alexei Mishunin. He drew up all the necessary sale-purchase documents while I went to take a look at the property. It included a large house, a fifth of a hectare of land, a bathhouse, garage, and greenhouse. We even got a cow and a flock of sheep in the bargain. Not exactly a priority, but Mishunin said the owners had to go away and wanted to sell everything at once. There was feed for the cow, and he had already arranged for a woman from the village to come in and do the milking. A couple of days later, I called a meeting of the members of the cooperative to tell them about our acquisition. I explained it was intended for entertaining guests, as well as being a place where the members of the cooperative could relax and celebrate special occasions. We would all have to work together to fix up the place, do some renovations, and modernize the kitchen. The male half of the cooperative greeted the idea with great enthusiasm, but the women began whispering among themselves. It wasn't clear who the ringleader was, but my wife took on the role of spokesperson, saying the men had overstepped all recognized bounds of decency in respect to the women. "We work with you as equals here," she declared. "After that, we go home every day and clean house, cook meals, and take care of the children. Does that seem trifling to you? And now you want us, in addition to all that, to work our asses off at this country house of yours, do renovations, and then be cooks and waitresses for your receptions and drinking parties?" That was when all hell broke loose. The women poured out on the men all their personal and family grievances and other pet peeves. I realized this when one of them cried out, "All you do is fool around with dominoes and stare at the tube the whole evening long." I knew that none of the men at the cooperative played dominoes. It was her husband, a firefighter, who played. He didn't even work for us. But wives of the cooperative workers were especially pissed off. One of them stupidly blurted out to her husband in front of everyone, "You always smell of sweat and cheap cigarettes." He was especially fond of the Prima brand. "And now you're going to be smelling of cow dung too?" A silence hung over the room. The husband took a deep gulp of air, blushed, and retorted, "I shall especially smell of cow dung, especially so that you won't come near me, you slut." At this, she burst into tears. The women gathered around to console her, and it made them even more pissed off. They started hurling all sorts of insults. One of our workers was named Zenya Kolpakov. He had invented all sorts of devices to increase productivity and could fix anything that needed fixing. But now, they told him, "We have inventors here, but it takes a whole year to clean up after them." Then the discussion turned to politics. Gorbachev goes on television, but it's Raisa Maximovna who makes all the decisions. I declared a recess. I thought everyone somehow might come to their senses. After the break, they all took their seats again, the outward restraint barely masking the inner tension. Once again, my wife spoke in the name of the women. With a contrived tranquility, she threw out a venomous ultimatum. "Of course, if you really want a country residence, go ahead, but not one of us women will step foot in it. In other words, it'll be yours alone. And since we share our funds in common and you have no right to spend them without our consent, as compensation, we demand you give us one of the company cars with a driver, especially for our household use. We will take turns using it." "Great," came a chorus of male voices. "Go ahead and choke yourselves. We'll give you anything you like as long as you promise not to show up there." "They're bound to find some farm hussies out there," one of the women observed. "Let them look," retorted another. "Those hussies will soon make themselves scarce. Who needs them?" None of the men whose wives worked at the cooperative went home that night. It was Friday, and we headed out to our hacienda. We took a good look around and started making plans for settling in. The next day, we heated up the bathhouse. At Mishunin's request, the village woman came to milk the cow. We watched how she did it. It was a pleasant time. The cow was quiet, not restless. She was ours now. The woman advised that she wouldn't always be able to come to do the milking. We would need to look up somebody else. After an early evening cleansing at the bathhouse, we cooked ourselves supper. It turned out we had quite a feast. Mishunin fried some fish. We put out bottles of beer and vodka and sat down at the table. And all at once, moo! It was the cow. We got up and headed for the barn. It was milking time, and there was no milkmaid around. We stood there, 8 men, in front of the cow, and had no idea what to do. In any case, who can explain what sometimes happens to people at the sight of an animal? You live your life, day after day, without the slightest thought for non-human creatures. And then, all at once, you find yourself in a situation where one of them's in your home, a cat or a dog or some other animal, and you find you have the same kind of feeling come over you that you'd have in the presence of a child. You're nervous, you worry. Why is that? Maybe it's really true that the first man, Adam, when God gave him the job of naming all the creatures, looked upon each one with love. And this love is something we've all inherited. It hides, for the most part, deep down inside us, and makes an appearance only from time to time. Nobody can say for certain whether that's true or not. Only each one of us, I'm telling you, had some sort of feeling for that cow, and I'm positive it felt something for us too. And this is what came out of it. Seryoska Kodakov said, "The milk is likely bursting at her udder. We've got to do something." We started in pestering Mishunin. "Why on earth," we said, "did you buy a cow?" And yet, at the same time, we felt bad about selling it. It had only been 1 day, but we had somehow taken to it like one of our own. The cow looked at us with her sorrowful eyes, silently. Then she stretched her head out toward me and let out a loud moo. She was mooing so pleadingly, and I told Mishunin, "Better get to the milking right away, since you were the one who bought her." Mishunin quickly fetched the milk pail, tied the kerchief around his head, the kerchief the milkmaid had left behind, and climbed into the cow's stall. He asked us not to leave, as God knows what this cow might do. She let him approach and start milking her. We brought the cow some water to drink, put fresh hay into her stall, and gave her some bread. Mishunin went on milking. At first, he wasn't very successful. Only in very thin streams of milk came out, and even then sometimes missed the pail. But then it got a little better. After 15 minutes, the milk was still coming. Mishunin said, whispering for some reason, "Sweat! My sweat's getting in the way." We gathered up handkerchiefs from whoever had them, and Seryoska Kodokov climbed into the stall to wipe the perspiration from Alexei's forehead. He squatted down beside him to see how the milking was going, from time to time wiping the sweat from Alexei's face. And suddenly we could hear Seryoska's agitated whisper, "What are you doing? You're hurting her. You've got a good stream coming from your right hand, but only a third of that from your left. You can permanently damage her udder that way." "It's my fingers," Mishunin whispered. "It's 'cause my fingers have gone numb on my left hand. Maybe you'd better help." Seryoska Kodakov approached the cow from the other side, and they began milking together simultaneously. After half an hour, maybe more, they had milked a whole pailful. That night at supper we drank fresh milk, and I swear it was the best tasting milk we'd ever had in our lives. Early the next morning, we were awakened by the milkmaid, who told us with some astonishment that she had tried milking the cow that morning, but for some unknown reason the cow wouldn't let her anywhere close to her. Once again, we trotted off to the barn. We did everything just the way we had the night before, and the cow started milking. "Well, ain't that the limit?" exclaimed the woman. "Since the cow seems to like you so much, you can milk her from now on. Happens that way, you know. A cow can let some people come close, but others she jolly well won't." Our cow, it turned out, was quite picky. Not only did she not let any of the hired milkmaids near her, whenever she was milked, she demanded that one of us stand by her muzzle and feed her and talk to her, while the milking had to be a joint effort on the part of 2 men together. That meant 3 of us had to go for each milking session. So that's how we drew up the schedule, 3 at a time. At least until we sold the cow, we thought. But it wasn't long before the rumors about our picky cow began flying around. Buyers would come and try milking her themselves, and nothing happened. And they'd refuse to take her, even for a pittance. Granted, I did make one condition, that she wasn't to be slaughtered for meat. We called in the veterinarian, and he told us, "That does happen, fellows. An animal gets used to someone and may reject others for a long time. But tell me, what on earth possessed you to domesticate her that way?" He didn't have any real advice to offer us, apart from telling us that our cow was calving, meaning she was pregnant. When the time came, he would have to prepare a birthing. The vet indicated the approximate date. We would know when the time was near when she stopped giving milk. Since the men were obliged to keep watch 3 at once, we ended up spending a lot of time out at our hacienda, even staying overnight there. Our wives had a hard time accepting that we really were having problems with the cow, since they had sworn never to set foot in our hacienda themselves, and looked upon this whole story of the cow as a convenient excuse. The women and wives working at the cooperative completely lost all sense of self-control. They started telling obscene jokes. The one who complained about her husband's bad smell said, "Only a sexual pervert could attract such a perverted cow." To which he retorted, "I'd rather spend my whole life milking a silent cow than listening to your dumb remarks." Soon afterward, he moved out completely to live in the hacienda, and later got a divorce from his wife. He married a young country girl with a child and became quite a decent farmer. Then one day, when the cow stopped giving milk, on the vet's advice, we got everything ready for the birthing. But the cow gave birth all by herself and without incident. She bore a little bull calf, a handsome son of a gun. When we called the vet, he took one look at the pair and said, "Well, that's great. Nothing more to be done here. She's taking care of it all by herself. Just keep the place clean. Make sure she's well fed." Sometime later, we managed to find a good home for both the cow and her bull calf. One day, we went over to see what the handsome creature he had turned into, our little bull, and everything was arranged nicely for his mother. Even now, I still think of her. I wonder whether she remembers us. But while we got things settled for the cow, we didn't manage to restore a sense of harmony and mutual understanding in the cooperative. So I ended up dividing the cooperative in 2, reorganizing part of it under a different name. I began using the chartered ship to make long trading voyages to the north along the River Ob. In between such voyages, I conducted business cruises for the Russian and foreign entrepreneurs. I took the lesson home that one indispensable condition of success, among others, is a sense of mutual understanding and respect in a collective. You must have faith not only in your own abilities, but in everyone's. Any kind of ability you have is multiplied by your faith in the people around you. Chapter 15. Herbalife Entrepreneurs. It was only upon arriving at Moscow's Vnukovo airport that I realized my funds were rather low. I had only 5 million rubles left, and I did not even have a specific plan of action. It was hardly likely that either my employees or my family would be able to cope with my accumulated debts. They would have to sell the company's assets, meaning I could not look to home for any assistance. I had remained in Novosibirsk, of course. I could have worked things out. But that would have meant concentrating all my attention on the daily affairs of my business, something that was impossible after what had happened in the taiga and the promises I had made to both to Anastasia and to myself. Indeed, by this time it was hard to determine whether my actions were being guided by my own awareness or desire, or by Anastasia's influence. One thing was crystal clear: I was bankrupt. Having witnessed countless similar situations among my colleagues, I knew there was nobody I could turn to. Either friends, relatives, or former employees, they would all avoid you like the plague. You can spend 10 years of your life being a hero, and then just one little mistake can put you in the doghouse and make you a non-person, despised by everyone you know. It's happened to a lot of prominent entrepreneurs. In a situation like this, you can only hope in yourself and your ability to find a way out of a dead-end predicament. After leaving my bag containing a sweater, some shirts, and a few other trifles at a hotel, I started tramping around the streets of Moscow. I tried figuring out what it all meant, everything Anastasia had said about Russia's entrepreneurs. The first thing that struck my eye in Moscow this time was the activity of the so-called Herbalifers. Neatly dressed people stood in the tunnels leading to metro stations in the city center, haranguing passerbys with job offers. With a foreign firm, as they said, they were luring them with promises of huge earnings and opportunity for promotion. The word Herbalife wasn't even mentioned, probably because almost every classified advertisement in the paper posted by a job seeker ended with the words, "No Herbalife offers." Still, they stood there, wearing "Work for You" buttons and handing out flyers from some foreign firm, stubbornly urging people to at least come for an interview. Later I learned that those responding were subjected to intense psychological conditioning, with special emphasis on 2 points dear to the heart of the average Russian. First, seminar speakers would make a big thing of telling how they or their relatives, for example, received a fantastic healing with the help of this Herbalife from overseas, with the implication that any potential distributor could also engage in the noble practice of treating people's ailments. The system was so miraculous, they declared, that no medical courses were needed, just 2 or 3 training sessions. Even if you were a simple painter or plasterer, and presto, you were qualified to act as a consultant to ailing consumers. Secondly, they made a point of telling stories with examples of how one could get rich through promoting and distributing Herbalife products. This meant buying at least one package for starters with your own money. Then, finding someone else and convincing him in a one-on-one conversation of the fantastic benefits of using Herbalife, then selling it to him at a slightly higher price. At the same time, you needed to keep recruiting more distributors, getting a percentage from each new recruit. The more recruits you attracted, the higher you would rise in the hierarchy, and the more money you would accrue to you. You would reach a point where you yourself wouldn't have to do any of the actual distribution work. As an entrepreneur, I soon realized one thing very clearly. Money did come showering down in a rain of gold, but only for the person at the very top of this pyramid system and his closest collaborators. The whole long chain of distributors, divided into so-called levels, survived only thanks to each level benefiting from its own price markup. And it was all paid for by the one at the very bottom, the consumer who believed in the miracle properties of the product. In some cases, the price increased by 12 times. The actual distribution keeps rolling along non-stop, thanks to the huge number of agents using their own accounts of healing to win the trust of their fellow Russians and make them believe in the miracle properties of Herbalife. A system like this is capable of selling even the ashes from one stove. Any complainers are simply told they have somehow misunderstood the instructions on the label or not followed them closely enough. This system is especially effective in our country, where people are accustomed to getting the most reliable information from trusted friends and acquaintances rather than through official channels. There is no point whatsoever in discussing the advantages or disadvantages of the Herbalife products themselves. That is a long story. I can only say one thing with absolute certainty. All the fervor of the distributors telling about their own healings disappears as soon as they realize they're not going to get any money from you. In that case, you'll start hearing a whole string of counterexamples such as, "It's nothing but a load of crap." This distribution system was invented in the West. Managed from the West, it lures in all sorts of unemployed Russians, but these are not our entrepreneurs. And now I shall tell you of yet another gimmick invented by Western businessmen. Chapter 16. Free Holidays in Hawaii. If you should be stopped on a crowded Moscow street by smartly dressed young people, some of whom speak with an accent, inviting you to a presentation by a foreign firm with your own reserved table and free lottery tickets, offering you the opportunity to win a gold watch or even a free trip to Hawaii, you can be sure that you will be guaranteed a free trip. But it is best to bear in mind the old saying, the only free cheese is in a mousetrap. It's not hard to figure out just how this particular mousetrap works. What you get for free is the opportunity to stay in elegant lodgings. Upon arriving, you discover that they really do look like the photos in the brochures. The catch is, you have to pay for the airline ticket, your food, and all the incidentals. A few days into your stay, you realize that this free vacation is ending up costing you quite a bit more than the full price of a stay at some other comparable resort. It's all very simple. Your free stay is paid for by a host of surcharges on a range of food and other services. These surcharges cover, by the way, the agents standing on the street corner and the so-called free presentation. The color brochures they hand you, not to mention the company's profit. Of course, for those with lots of money to spare, it doesn't make too much difference. The only bad thing you might feel is the unpleasant sensation of being made a fool of. It is quite a different matter when an average Russian wage earner of modest means, one who has spent a whole year saving for such a trip, takes the bait and instead of going to see his mother, or for a holiday at a Russian resort, hands over his hard-earned savings to these foreign smartasses, and like a fool spends 2 weeks in lodgings designed for fools like him. Gentlemen from abroad, where did this attitude of disrespect for us Russians come from? As I was looking at the sales kiosks in our streets filled with imported goods, even imported bottled water, I remembered how it had been the same way on my ships. But back then, I had never really thought about what was behind it. I was listening to radio reports about the suspicious quality of the chicken legs on sale all over the country, as well as about bottled water with fancy labels promoting its healing mineral properties, belying the fact that this stuff, sold in our stores, was simply tap water with suspicious additives. I was noticing the huge number of signs advertising how you could refresh your strength with a hot dog, as if all of Moscow and even all of Russia had suddenly made these rubber sausages their national dish, and wondering why this had never struck me before as it did now. I remembered the respect and enthusiasm with which we had greeted visiting entrepreneurs from abroad at the beginning of perestroika. I remembered how I'd organized business cruises down the River Ob for them on my ship, and how the Siberian entrepreneurs tried as hard as they could to provide them with the highest quality service. Of course, not all the visitors were the same, but what did we gain in the long term? So, where are you, entrepreneurs of Russia, the ones that should be making our country flourish? Chapter 17. The Beginning of Perestroika. At the very beginning of perestroika, when the first law on cooperatives in the USSR was enacted, many saw it as a call to action, and a lot of young people, as well as many not so young but invariably full of energy and desire to really do something for themselves and their country, literally threw themselves into the fray, and immediately found themselves surrounded by a hostile, pestering crowd. "Down with them," the crowd shouted. "Bourgeois smartasses. What did we fight for anyway?" And even though many Russian pioneer entrepreneurs ended up working round the clock, pouring in a colossal amount of energy not to mention their unique wit and inventiveness. Hardly any of their efforts met with so much as a thank you. The modicum of support they required was usually provided only by intercommunication and interaction with each other. Then a concept was born. It literally came out of thin air, the idea of creating a union of USSR cooperators. I was part of the pilot group initiating the project, along with the well-known Russian entrepreneur Artem Tarasov. Most of us at the time were communists. At the first Entrepreneurs Congress, I was elected secretary of the Congress's Communist Party Central Committee. Comrade Kolosovsky that it was incredibly difficult for entrepreneurs to work under such pestering. We needed first and foremost the party's moral support, but I soon realized that we were going to be facing hostility and pestering from a segment of the ordinary public, as well as high and low-ranking officials for a long time to come. We could not look to the higher echelons of the Central Committee for any outward show of support, since they were afraid of losing popularity. Already their power was greatly diminished compared to the heyday of Soviet communism. An internal struggle had apparently begun and was now in full swing. In addition, entrepreneurs had begun to feel mounting pressure from a tax squeeze. And today, with maybe one or two exceptions, not a single business can keep afloat if it dutifully pays all the required taxes. Realizing this, many of them have managed to escape the tax squeeze by using all sorts of tricky loopholes. But in doing this, they have landed themselves in an even more precarious situation, being outside the law. Attempt after attempt to make officials on various levels see the absurdity of the prevailing tax system have not exactly been crowned with success. Indeed, they could not be, since the ones who initiated the system, and this is my own personal assumption, understand better than anyone else the impossibility of paying all the taxes, but this was exactly what they needed. Needed for what? For power, of course, for extortion. One false step and you could be instantly ground to powder, outlawed by tax police and inspectors. I felt sorry for the first entrepreneurs of perestroika, as well as for Russia's current crop of businessmen. I decided to do for them whatever lay within my powers. I went to the League of Russian Cooperators and Entrepreneurs, originally headed by Vladimir Alexandrovich Tikhonov, whom we had elected to the post in perestroika's early days. The League of Executive Presidium still maintained a headquarters, but many of the offices were empty. Vladimir Alexandrovich had died a year and a half earlier. I was told that the chairman of the Russian Business Roundtable, Ivan Kivilidi, had been poisoned, together with his secretary, just 6 months ago. Artem Tarasov had resigned from the League, and the organization's membership was only a shadow of its former self. Thanks to my acquaintance with one of the 3 remaining League executives, my request for space in one of the empty offices was granted, along with 2 telephones, a computer, and a fax machine. Since the League had no organizational funds available, I was pretty much on my own. To save time and hotel expenses, I used the office for my sleeping quarters as well. I was awakened every morning at 6 o'clock by the arrival of the cleaning lady, and the absence of a TV allowed me to work most evenings right up until midnight. This sudden shift in living conditions from a luxury ship's cabin, where anything I wanted to eat or drink was only a bell ring away, to a drab office not designed for living accommodation, in no way embarrassed me. In many respects, it actually afforded me greater opportunities to pursue my work. I spent my time thinking out and drafting a constitution for a fellowship of entrepreneurs, along with compiling letters of appeal. These I sent out by fax in the early hours of the morning, when the communication lines weren't as busy. By hook or by crook, making use of both newspaper adverts and chance encounters, I gathered together a secretariat of various Moscow professionals who shared my enthusiasm for the project and realized its significance. The secretariat also included 3 Moscow University students. First there came Anton Nikolaikin, who had been called in to fix a broken computer. Later, after learning of our work on organizing the fellowship, he brought along two of his friends, Artem Semenov and Alexei Novichkov. They immediately began working on encoding the electronic version of the Golden Catalog of Russia, for which they were able to put together a highly professional computer program.